The forest had no name, not anymore. Once, centuries ago, it might have been called something gentle, something that spoke of spring and birdsong and the laughter of children playing beneath ancient oaks. But time had stripped away such softness, leaving only the weight of shadow and the whisper of things that should not be. The trees here grew twisted, their branches reaching toward a sky they would never touch, gnarled fingers clawing at the darkness. Moss hung like funeral shrouds from limbs that had witnessed more death than life, and the ground beneath was soft with the decay of 1,000 forgotten seasons. It was here, in this place where even moonlight hesitated to tread, that Nathaniel Cross found himself holding the impossible in his arms. She was dying. He could feel it in the way her body had gone slack against his chest, in the terrible lightness of her that seemed to defy the weight of what she was, what she had been. Crimson veins spiderwebbed across her pale skin like cracks in porcelain, glowing with a faint, pulsing luminescence that cast strange shadows across his face. Each pulse grew weaker, slower, the rhythm of something ancient winding down to its final silence. Her blood, if it could be called blood, seeped through his shirt, warm and wrong, glowing with that same eerie red light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. "Please," Nathaniel whispered, though he didn't know what he was asking for. "Mercy? Time? Answers?" His voice cracked on the single word, and he tasted salt on his lips, unsure if it was his tears or the cold mist that had begun to swirl through the trees like living things. "Please don't go." The woman in his arms stirred, and even that small movement seemed to cost her everything. Her hand, slender, pale, tipped with nails that came to elegant points, rose trembling toward her face. Toward the mask. The mask. God, the mask. It was a thing of terrible beauty, wrought from silver so pure it seemed to drink in the moonlight and transform it into something colder, something that hurt to look at directly. Ancient runes carved across its surface in patterns that made Nathaniel's eyes water when he tried to follow them. Symbols from a language that predated human civilization, that spoke of blood and binding and secrets kept in darkness. The mask covered everything from her forehead to her chin, leaving only her lips visible. Lips that had once been full and red but now faded to the color of ash. How long had she worn it? How many lifetimes had passed with that silver face between her and the world? "Remove it," she whispered, her voice like wind through dead leaves, barely audible even in the profound silence of the forest. Her fingers touched the edge of the mask, and Nathaniel saw that even this small gesture left tremors running through her entire body. "Remove my mask, Nathaniel, and you'll finally know who I really am." His hands shook as he raised them to her face. The mask was cold beneath his fingertips, so cold it burned, and he felt the runes beneath his touch like raised scars, like warning signs written in a language his body understood even if his mind did not. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to leave the mask in place, to preserve whatever mystery lay beneath rather than face the truth that had been hidden for so long. But he had loved her. God help him, he had loved her without ever seeing her face. The fog thickened around them, drawn by the moment as if the forest itself held its breath. Embers that had no source drifted through the air like dying stars, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, or perhaps it was something that only sounded like a wolf. The wind picked up, cold enough to bite, carrying with it the scent of old graves and older magic. Nathaniel's fingers found the clasps hidden along the mask's edge, mechanisms so fine and ancient he could barely feel them. His heart hammered against his ribs as if trying to escape, to flee from whatever revelation was coming. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not after everything. Not after the years of shadow and secrecy, of stolen moments in darkness and whispered promises that always ended before dawn. "I'm ready," he lied, his voice breaking. "I'm ready to see you." Her hand fell away from the mask, dropping to her side as if she no longer had the strength to hold it up. The glow of her veins pulsed once more, bright and desperate, and then began to fade. She was running out of time. They were running out of time. "Then look," she whispered, and her voice carried within it the weight of centuries, of lifetimes lived in shadow and shame and a loneliness so profound it had carved canyons through her soul. "Look and remember. Remember who I was before the darkness. Remember who I loved. Remember what was taken. Remember what I sacrificed." Nathaniel lifted the mask. 3 years earlier, on a night when autumn had just begun its slow murder of summer, Nathaniel Cross had walked into a bookshop that shouldn't have existed. He had been lost, literally and metaphorically. Lost in the winding streets of Prague's old town, lost in the maze of his own life, lost in the grief that had followed him like a shadow since his sister's death 6 months prior. Elena had been everything bright and good in his world, and when the cancer took her, it had taken with it any sense of purpose Nathaniel might have had. He'd quit his job as an architect, sold his apartment in London, and disappeared into Europe with nothing but a backpack and a hollow space where his heart used to be. The bookshop appeared between one breath and the next, its door materializing from shadow on a street he could have sworn had been empty moments before. The sign above the entrance was written in no language he recognized, symbols that shifted and changed when he tried to focus on them, but somehow he understood the meaning beneath the incomprehensible letters. Antiquarian books and forbidden knowledge. Something in him, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries, that had made him good at his old profession, at seeing the hidden structures beneath surface beauty, that part compelled him forward. The door opened at his touch, though he hadn't pushed it, and he stepped into a space that seemed to extend far beyond the physical boundaries of the building. Books rose in towers around him, stacked to a ceiling lost in shadow, their spines bearing titles in languages dead and living, their pages yellowed with age or fresh as if printed that morning. The air smelled of leather and dust and something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, the scent of old magic, of power that had been sleeping but never quite dead. "You're here," a voice said from the darkness between the shelves, and Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. She emerged like a ghost, dressed in black that seemed to be woven from shadow itself, the silver mask covering her face reflecting the dim candlelight in strange patterns. Even masked, even with her features completely hidden, there was something about her that stopped his heart and then started it again at double speed. The grace of her movement, the tilt of her head, the way she seemed to carry centuries in the set of her shoulders despite a form that appeared no older than 30. I was just browsing," Nathaniel stammered, suddenly aware of how mundane he must seem, how ordinary in the face of whatever she was. "No one just browses here," she said, and though he couldn't see her mouth behind the mask, he could hear the faint smile in her voice. "This shop only appears to those who are searching for something they don't yet know they need. Tell me, Nathaniel Cross, what is it that brought you to my door?" He should have been frightened by the fact that she knew his name. He should have turned and fled back into the ordinary Prague night. But instead, he found himself answering with a truth he hadn't spoken aloud to anyone. "I'm looking for a reason to keep living." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. She moved closer and he caught her scent, old roses and rain and something metallic like blood. Up close, he could see the intricate details of her mask more clearly, the runes that seemed to pulse with their own faint light, the way it fit her face so perfectly it might have been grown rather than crafted. "That's quite a heavy thing to search for," she said softly. "Perhaps you might start with something smaller. A book maybe. There's one here that's been waiting for you." She led him through the labyrinth of shelves to a small alcove where a single volume sat on a reading stand, illuminated by a candle that burned with a blue-white flame. The book was bound in black leather, its cover bare of any title or decoration, but when Nathaniel touched it, he felt a shock run through his entire body, recognition though he'd never seen it before. "What is this?" he asked. "A story," she replied. "A true one. About a woman who lived 1,000 lifetimes and lost everything that mattered in each one. About a curse that cannot be broken and a love that transcends death. About the price of immortality and the cost of a single choice made in desperation." Nathaniel opened the book. The pages were filled with handwriting that changed from section to section. Ancient script giving way to medieval Latin, then Renaissance Italian, then languages that seemed to shift even as he looked at them. But somehow, impossibly, he could read it all. "Is this your story?" he asked, looking up at the masked woman. She was silent for a long moment. Then, "Yes, and no. It's the story of who I was. Who I might have been. Who I can never be again. Read it if you dare. But know that once you begin, you won't be able to stop until you reach the end. And the end, Nathaniel Cross, is not yet written." He should have walked away. He should have closed the book and left that impossible shop and forgotten the masked woman who spoke in riddles and sorrows. But Elena had always told him he was too curious for his own good, too drawn to puzzles and mysteries to ever leave them unsolved. So he sat down in the alcove and he began to read. The story that unfolded in those pages was impossible and terrible and heartbreaking. It told of a young woman named Mira who had lived in a time before nations had names, in a village at the edge of a great forest. She had been a healer, beloved by her people, gifted with an intuition for herbs and medicines that bordered on the supernatural. She had saved countless lives with her knowledge, had eased countless sufferings with her gentle hands. And then the plague had come. It swept through the village like fire, killing without mercy, taking young and old, strong and weak. Mira worked herself to exhaustion trying to save them, but her herbs and potions were useless against this new horror. One by one, everyone she loved died screaming, their bodies covered in black pustules, their blood turning to poison in their veins. In her desperation, Mira had ventured deep into the forest, to a place where the oldest trees grew and where it was said that ancient things still dwelt in shadow. She had begged the darkness for help, for power, for anything that might save her people. And the darkness had answered. It came in the form of a being that called itself the first vampire, a creature that existed before humanity had learned to fear the night. It offered Mira a bargain, immortality and the power to save her village from the plague, but at a price. She would become like it, a creature of blood and shadow, forever cut off from the sun, forever hungry for the life she had once worked so hard to preserve. And more than that, she would wear a mask for all eternity, a mask that would hide her true face from the world and from herself, a reminder of the bargain she had made and the humanity she had traded away. But my people will live? Mira had asked. If I accept this, they will be saved? Yes, the first vampire had promised. You will have the power to cure them. But you will never again be one of them. You will walk through centuries while they live and die like mayflies. You will love and lose over and over forever. Mira had accepted. How could she not? Her people were dying. Her village was being erased from existence. What was one life, even an eternal one, measured against so many? The first vampire had been true to its word. Transformed, wearing the silver mask that had been fused to her very soul, Mira had returned to her village with the power to cure the plague. She had saved them all, every last soul, had watched them recover and celebrate and thank the gods for their deliverance. And then she had left because they couldn't know what she had become. Couldn't see the hunger in her that demanded blood, couldn't understand the darkness that now lived beneath her skin. She had wandered into exile, into an immortality that stretched before her like an endless desert, wearing a mask that ensured she would never again be seen for who she truly was. Nathaniel read through the night, through pages that detailed century after century of loneliness. He read of the loves Mira had found and lost, the friends who had aged and died while she remained forever young behind her mask, the children she could never have, the home she could never keep. He read of the times she had tried to break the curse, sought out magic and witches and holy men and dark rituals, all in vain. The mask could not be removed, or rather it could be removed only once in the moment of her final death, when at last the immortality wore off and she was allowed to pass beyond. He read of the wars she had witnessed, the kingdoms that rose and fell, the languages that were born and died, the relentless march of time that meant nothing to her except more loss, more endings, more proof that she was forever separate from the world of the living. And he read of the prophecy, a whisper she had heard from a seer in Renaissance Venice, a fragment of hope that had sustained her through centuries of despair. When the last mask falls, truth will be revealed. What was lost will be remembered. Who you were will return. When Nathaniel finally looked up from the book, dawn was breaking outside the windows. But the bookshop remained in shadow, as if it existed in its own pocket of darkness. The masked woman sat across from him, still as a statue, watching him with eyes he couldn't see but could feel. Why? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why show me this? Because you asked for a reason to live, she said. And I thought perhaps I could offer you purpose. No one has ever read that entire story before. No one has ever cared enough to stay until the end. Most people close the book after the first few chapters, unable to bear the weight of so much sorrow. How could I stop? Nathaniel said. How could anyone stop knowing you've suffered so much? She tilted her head, and he saw her hand tremble slightly before she clasped it with the other. Most people don't see suffering. They see a monster. A creature that drinks blood and lives in shadow. They see something to be feared, not pitied. Nathaniel stood, closing the distance between them. Up close, he could see the fine craftsmanship of the mask, the way it seemed to be part of her rather than something worn. He could see the paleness of her skin where it showed at her throat and wrists, the way she held herself with the careful control of someone who had learned over centuries not to reveal too much. "I see a woman who sacrificed everything to save people who never knew what she'd done," he said quietly. "I see someone who's been alone for longer than most civilizations have existed. I see pain and endurance and a kind of strength I can barely comprehend." "You see a fantasy," she said, but her voice wavered. "You don't know me. You've read words on a page, but you don't know what it's like to be this, to hunger, to watch everyone you care about wither and die while you remain unchanged, unaging, unwelcome in the world of the living." "Then let me learn," Nathaniel said. "Let me know you. Not the story you. The person behind the mask." "I can't remove it," she whispered. "Not until the end. You'll never see my face. Never know what I truly look like. Never see me smile or cry or—" "I don't need to see your face to know you," Nathaniel interrupted. "Elena used to say that people hide their true selves behind all kinds of masks, faces they put on for the world, personas they adopt, walls they build. Your mask is just more literal than most. But I spent the whole night reading your story, feeling your pain, understanding your choices. That's more than most people ever share with anyone." Silence fell between them, heavy and pregnant with possibility. Outside, Prague was waking to a new day, but in the bookshop, in this pocket of shadow and magic, time seemed to hold its breath. "My name is Mira," she said finally, and even through the mask he could hear the tears in her voice. "My true name. The one I haven't spoken in 500 years. Nathaniel," he replied, offering his hand. "Though I think you already knew that." Her fingers were cold when they touched his, cold as marble, but her grip was gentle. "Yes," she said. "I've been waiting for you. For someone who could read the story to its end. For someone who might understand." "Understand what?" "That I'm tired," Mira whispered. "So tired? I've lived for over 3,000 years, Nathaniel. I've seen empires rise from dust and crumble back to nothing. I've loved and lost so many times I've lost count. And I'm tired of being alone. Tired of hiding. Tired of this endless, empty existence where I'm forever cut off from everything that makes life worth living." Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently. "Then don't be alone. Not anymore. Let me in, Mira. Let me be part of your story, even if I'm just a footnote in a life as long as yours. You'll age," she said. "You'll grow old while I stay as I am. You'll die, and I'll have to watch it happen, have to lose you like I've lost everyone else. That's the curse. Not just immortality but the guarantee that everyone I love will leave me in the end." "Yes," Nathaniel agreed. "I'll age. I'll die. But isn't a short story better than no story at all? Isn't even a brief connection better than eternal loneliness? Elena used to say that the pain of loss is just proof that love was real. That it mattered. Would you rather live forever having never loved at all?" Mira was quiet for a long time. Then she laughed. A sound like breaking glass, beautiful and sharp and full of centuries of unshed tears. "Your sister was wise. I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Nathaniel said softly. "She always did have a thing for tragic heroes." "Is that what I am?" Mira asked. "A tragic hero? You're someone who's survived when most would have broken. Someone who's kept her humanity despite everything that tried to strip it away. Someone who deserves not to be alone." And so, in that impossible bookshop on a Prague morning, Nathaniel Cross and Mira began something that neither of them could quite name. Not quite a relationship. How could it be, when one of them was human and temporary while the other was immortal and masked? Not quite a friendship. There was too much intensity, too much recognition, too much need on both sides. Perhaps it was simply two lonely souls finding each other in the darkness, clinging together against the weight of their separate griefs. What followed were 3 years that Nathaniel would later recognize as the most vivid, most alive he had ever felt. They traveled together, moving through Europe's hidden places, the cities within cities, the forgotten corners where magic still lingered like smoke in ancient stone. Mira showed him wonders that shouldn't exist, markets that appeared only under full moons, libraries carved into the roots of mountains, gatherings of creatures that humanity had relegated to myth. She taught him about her world, The hierarchy of immortals, the politics of creatures that lived in shadow, the delicate balance between the supernatural and the mundane that kept both worlds from destroying each other. She introduced him to others like her. Vampires who had learned to coexist with their nature, who had found ways to feed without killing, who had built lives and communities in the spaces between human civilization. But more than that, she let him see her. Not her face, the mask remained always an immovable barrier of silver and magic, but her soul. She shared the small details that made her who she was. Her love of opera that dated back to its invention in Renaissance Italy, her unexpected talent for painting though she could never see her own portrait, her fondness for thunderstorms and the way she would stand in the rain for hours, letting it wash over her as if trying to cleanse away centuries of accumulated sorrow. Nathaniel learned to read her despite the mask, to understand the subtle shifts in her posture that indicated emotion, to hear the changes in her voice that revealed joy or sadness or fear. He learned that she was funny, darkly, sarcastically funny in a way that came from seeing humanity's follies repeat across centuries. He learned that she was kind, that despite her hunger and her nature, she valued life above all else and would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid causing harm. And he fell in love with her. How could he not? It was a strange love, complicated by the impossibility of their situation. They could not be together in the way ordinary lovers were. Mira didn't sleep, couldn't eat human food, existed in a state somewhere between life and death that made physical intimacy complex and fraught with danger. There were nights when the hunger became too strong, when she had to disappear for hours to feed, returning pale and shaken and refusing to speak of where she'd been or what she'd done. But there were also moments of perfect beauty. Nights spent in the bookshop, which Mira revealed could appear anywhere she wished, a pocket dimension anchored to her existence, reading to each other from ancient texts and modern novels alike. Days exploring medieval cathedrals and Gothic ruins, Mira sharing stories of having seen them built, of knowing the architects and stone carvers whose names were lost to history. Evenings sitting in silence on rooftops, watching cities light up below them, two solitary figures finding comfort in shared loneliness. Nathaniel documented everything in notebooks that quickly multiplied, filling them with sketches and observations and attempts to understand the impossible world he'd stumbled into. His training as an architect served him well. He had an eye for structure, for the hidden frameworks beneath surface appearance, and he applied that same analytical mind to understanding the supernatural. He drew diagrams of the magical wards that protected Myra's bookshop, wrote extensive notes on vampire physiology and the nature of immortality, filled pages with questions that Mira patiently answered. But there were some questions she wouldn't address. Like what would happen when he aged and she didn't? Like whether there was any way to break her curse. Like what her face looked like beneath the mask, and whether she even remembered any more after 3,000 years of never seeing it. Some things are better left unexplored, she told him once when he pressed about the curse. They were in Venice, sitting in the bookshop that had appeared in a narrow alley near the Rialto Bridge. Rain hammered against windows that looked out on a view that shouldn't have been possible from that location, and Mira held a glass of red wine she wouldn't drink, just keeping it warm between her palms. The curse can only be broken in death. When my immortality finally ends, if it ends, only then will the mask fall away. To pursue that knowledge is to pursue my death. And I'm not ready. Not yet. Not now that I've found you. But you've wanted to die, Nathaniel said quietly. You told me that. You said you were tired. I am. She set down the wine glass, reached across the table to take his hand. Her fingers were always cool, but he'd learned to find comfort in that coolness, in the reminder that she was something other, something impossible and yet undeniably real. But you've given me something I haven't had in centuries, a reason to want to see tomorrow, to be curious about what comes next. Even if that next is watching you grow old, I'd rather have that than end it now. That's not fair to you, Nathaniel protested. You shouldn't have to suffer just because I'm too selfish to let you go. Love is always selfish, Mira said, and there was a smile in her voice. And always sacrifice. We're both being selfish and we're both sacrificing. That's what makes it real. But the fear lingered in Nathaniel's heart. The knowledge that their time was limited, that every moment together was borrowed against his inevitable mortality. He began researching obsessively, digging through the occult texts in Myra's collection, seeking any mention of curses like hers, any hint of how they might be broken without death. It was this research that led him to the Council of Eternal Night. The Council was the governing body of the supernatural world, an ancient organization that maintained order among vampires, werewolves, witches, and all the other creatures that existed in humanity's blind spots. Mira had spoken of them rarely and with obvious discomfort, mentioning only that they held power beyond measure and were best avoided unless absolutely necessary. But Nathaniel's research had uncovered a reference to a case centuries ago where the council had broken a curse similar to Myra's, a binding that had been placed on a witch by a demon, tying her magic to her life in a way that made both impossible to separate. The council's intervention had required a ritual of immense power and complexity, but it had succeeded, freeing the witch without killing her. If they could do it once, surely they could do it again. Nathaniel brought his findings to Mira one winter evening in the bookshop, which had manifested that night in the Scottish Highlands, its windows showing views of snow-covered mountains and frozen lochs. He spread his notes across the table between them, pointing out the connections he'd found, the parallels between the witch's curse and Myra's. "Look," he said, too excited to notice the way Mira had gone very still. "The structure is almost identical. A bargain made with a powerful entity, a physical manifestation of the curse. In her case it was a brand on her palm. In yours it's the mask. The binding to immortality, the inability to be freed except in death. But the council found a loophole. They used a ritual that—" "No," Mira said, and her voice was cold enough to frost the air between them. Nathaniel looked up, startled. "What?" "No," she repeated. "We're not approaching the council. We're not attempting that ritual. We're not doing any of this, Nathaniel. I need you to let this go." "But why? If there's a chance." "Because the council takes payment for their services," Mira interrupted, standing abruptly and turning away from him. "Payment that you won't want to give. That I won't let you give." "What kind of payment?" She was silent for a long moment, her masked face turned toward the window, toward the snow and darkness beyond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The witch who was freed from her curse. Do you know what the council demanded in exchange?" The text didn't say. "They never do. But I know. I was there, Nathaniel. I witnessed it." Mira turned back to face him, and even without seeing her expression, he could feel the weight of her anguish. The council required that the witch's entire bloodline be given over to their service. Every child, grandchild, and descendant she would ever have, bound to the council for eternity. She was freed from one curse only to damn her entire family line to another. Nathaniel felt the hope drain out of him like water from a broken vessel. There has to be another way. There isn't. The council deals only in exchanges of equal weight. To break a curse as powerful as mine, to undo a bargain made with the first vampire itself, would require a payment I can't even imagine. And I won't ask it of you. I won't let you sacrifice yourself or anyone else for my sake. I've lived with this curse for 3,000 years. I can live with it for however much longer I have. But... No, she moved back to the table, knelt before his chair so that they were at eye level. He could see his reflection in the silver of her mask, could see the desperation written across his own face. "Nathaniel, please. I need you to promise me that you'll let this go. That you won't pursue the council. That you won't try to find a way to break my curse. Can you do that for me?" He wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that there had to be another path, another solution. But looking into that masked face, into the blankness that had become more dear to him than any human features could be, he found he couldn't refuse her. "I promise," he said, hating the words even as he spoke them. Myra's shoulders sagged with relief, and she rested her head against his knees. "Thank you. Thank you. I just want to enjoy what time we have, without grasping for impossible futures. Is that too much to ask?" "No," Nathaniel said, running his fingers through her long dark hair. "No, it's not too much." But even as he made the promise, even as he held her close and felt her cool body relax against him, a seed of determination planted itself in his heart. He would honor Myra's wishes. He wouldn't pursue the council. But that didn't mean he would stop looking for answers. The attack came on a night when autumn had turned the forests of Romania into a riot of gold and crimson. They had been exploring the ruins of a castle that Mira claimed to have visited in its glory days, when Vlad Tepes still ruled and the world whispered stories of the Impaler Prince. The castle was long abandoned now, overtaken by nature, its stones crumbling and its halls silent except for the wind. They were alone, or so they thought. The vampires came from the shadows like smoke taking form, at least a dozen of them, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. Unlike Mira, who had learned over millennia to control her hunger and maintain her humanity, these were feral things, lost to the bloodlust, their faces twisted into masks of inhuman hunger. "Run," Mira commanded, pushing Nathaniel behind her. "Get out of here. Now." But Nathaniel had not survived 3 years in the supernatural world by being helpless. He'd learned to defend himself, had carried protection given to him by various creatures they'd befriended, charms and wards and small weapons that could hurt things that should not be hurt. He pulled a knife blessed by a witch in Prague, its blade shimmering with enchantment. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "Foolish human," one of the vampires hissed, its voice like bones scraping together. "You think your toys can save you from us? We'll drain you dry and leave your corpse for the ravens." "You'll have to go through me first," Mira said, and her voice carried a power Nathaniel had never heard before, ancient and terrible, the weight of 3,000 years of existence compressed into words that made the very air vibrate. The fight was brutal and fast. Mira moved with a speed that made her nearly invisible, her hands becoming claws, her strength far beyond what her slender form suggested. She tore through the feral vampires with an efficiency born of millennia of surviving predators. Blood splattered across the ancient stones, glowing that eerie crimson that marked it as vampire blood, and the screams of the dying echoed through the ruined halls. But there were too many. For every one Mira destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Nathaniel fought as well, his blessed knife finding marks, but he was only human, only mortal, and his strength was failing. Then he saw one of the vampires circling behind Mira while she was engaged with 3 others. Saw its claws extend, saw it preparing to strike at her back, at the vulnerable space between her shoulder blades where even a vampire could be mortally wounded. Nathaniel didn't think. He just moved. He threw himself between Mira and the attacking vampire, felt claws tear through his chest, felt his ribs crack and his lung puncture. Pain exploded through him, white and all-consuming, and he heard Mira scream, a sound of such pure anguish it seemed to shake the foundations of the ruined castle. What happened next was something Nathaniel would never fully remember. There was light, brilliant and terrible, emanating from Mira herself, from the mask, from the very core of her being. The light consumed the attacking vampires, reduced them to ash and then to nothing, left the castle halls empty except for him and Mira and the blood pooling beneath his broken body. Then she was there, gathering him into her arms, her hands pressing against his chest trying futilely to stop the bleeding. "No, no, no," she chanted, rocking him. "Not you. Please not you. I can't lose you. I can't do this again." "It's okay," Nathaniel gasped, tasting blood. "I'm okay." "You're dying," Mira said flatly. "I can hear your heart failing. Can feel your life draining away. Nathaniel, I can save you. I can turn you. Make you like me. You'd survive, you'd." "No," he interrupted, using precious strength to raise his hand to her masked face. "No, Mira. That's not living. That's just existing. Like you've been existing. I don't want that. I don't want to become a thing that hungers, that has to feed on others to survive. I don't want eternity if it means losing my humanity." "Then what do you want?" she demanded, and he could hear tears in her voice though vampires supposedly couldn't cry. "You're going to die, Nathaniel. Right here in my arms, and there's nothing I can do to stop it unless you let me turn you. Please, please let me save you. I want you to live," he said. "Really live. Not just survive. Find a way to break the curse, Mira. Find a way to be free. Promise me." "I can't. You know I can't. The only way to break it is death," Nathaniel finished. "I know. But maybe my death could mean something. Maybe it could be the key." "What are you talking about?" Myra's voice was desperate now, panicked. "You're not making sense. The injury has you confused." But Nathaniel's architect mind, even in its dying moments, had seen the structure beneath. Had understood something that Mira, for all her centuries of wisdom, had missed. The curse was made to save your people. You traded your humanity to preserve their lives. But the curse keeps you from ever truly being with people again, from ever fully connecting with the humanity you sacrificed so much to save. It's a paradox. A structural impossibility. And paradoxes always have breaking points. What breaking point? Mira demanded. Love, Nathaniel said simply. You were supposed to be forever cut off from humanity. Forever separate. But you fell in love with me. A human. And I fell in love with you, not despite what you are but because of it. Because of your sacrifice and your strength and your endless compassion despite everything you've endured. That wasn't supposed to be possible. The curse wasn't designed to accommodate it. I don't understand, Mira whispered. The mask can only be removed in your final death, Nathaniel said, his voice getting weaker. But what if you could experience a death without actually dying? What if you could know loss so profound it breaks the immortality just for a moment? What if? He coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. Time was running out. What if watching me die, losing someone you truly love, creates a moment where the curse recognizes that you've paid enough? Nathaniel continued. That you've suffered the ultimate penalty, the loss of love, and therefore the bargain is fulfilled? 3,000 years of loneliness, Mira, and then finding love only to lose it. If that's not payment enough for saving a village from plague, then no payment ever will be. No, Mira said. No, I won't accept that. I won't let you die just to test a theory. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Nathaniel interrupted gently. And you know it. I'm dying, Mira. Whether you want to accept it or not, I'm dying. But maybe, just maybe, my death can be the thing that finally sets you free. That finally lets you remove the mask and be yourself again after 3,000 years. Isn't that worth something? Not if it costs me you, she said fiercely. You're worth more than any curse being broken. Worth more than my face or my freedom or anything else. I'd wear this mask for another 3,000 years if it meant keeping you alive. But I don't have 3,000 years, Nathaniel said, and managed a small smile despite the pain. I'm human, remember? Temporary. Mortal. Whether I die now or in 50 years, the end is the same. The only question is whether my death means something beyond just loss. Mira was shaking, her whole body trembling with a grief Nathaniel could feel radiating off her in waves. I don't want you to go. I can't do this. I can't watch you die. Not you. Please, Nathaniel. Please don't leave me. I don't want to leave, he admitted. God, Mira, I want nothing more than to stay with you. To have more time. To see where this story goes. But we don't always get what we want. Elena taught me that. Sometimes we only get to choose how we face the ending. His vision was starting to fade, darkness creeping in from the edges. He could feel his body shutting down, feel the cold spreading through his limbs. But he kept his hand on Myra's masked face, kept his focus on her, on the silver that reflected back his own dying image. Promise me, he said. Promise me you'll try. That you'll take off the mask when I'm gone. That you'll see if the curse breaks. That you won't spend another 3,000 years hiding from the world. Promise me you'll live, Mira. Really, truly live. I promise, she whispered. I promise. But Nathaniel, I need to tell you something. Before you go, you need to know. Know what? Her voice broke completely. Who I really am. What my face looks like. What I've been hiding all this time. Mira, I don't need. Please, she interrupted. Let me give you this. Let me let you see me, truly see me before the end. Remove my mask, Nathaniel. And you'll finally know who I really am. His fingers trembled as they found the clasps of the mask. He'd never been allowed to touch them before, had respected Myra's boundaries for 3 years despite his desperate curiosity. But now, with his life measured in heartbeats, he found the hidden mechanisms and began to open them. Look at me, Mira whispered. Remember me as I truly am. Remember who I was before the darkness. Remember what you gave back to me. The clasps opened with soft clicks that sounded impossibly loud in the ruined castle. Nathaniel's fingers shook as he lifted the silver mask away from Myra's face. And in the moonlight filtering through the broken ceiling, in the last moments of his fading consciousness, Nathaniel Cross finally saw the truth. The face that had been hidden for 3,000 years was not what Nathaniel expected. He had imagined many things in his time with Mira, had wondered if perhaps the mask hid some terrible disfigurement, some monstrous visage that the curse had inflicted. Or perhaps a face so beautiful it was dangerous to look upon, like the sirens and succubi of legend. But the truth was simpler and more heartbreaking than any of his imaginings. Myra's face was human. Utterly, completely human. She had large dark eyes that reflected the moonlight like pools of still water, eyes that held within them the weight of all the centuries she had lived and all the sorrows she had endured. Her skin was pale but not corpse-like, touched with a faint flush that suggested life even in her undead state. Her features were delicate, almost fragile, the kind of face that would have been called beautiful in any era, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that curved with a natural grace even in their current expression of anguish. But it was the tears that truly stopped Nathaniel's dying heart. Vampires weren't supposed to cry. He'd learned that in his studies, had been told by Mira herself that her kind couldn't produce tears, that the transformation stripped away such human weaknesses. Yet tears ran down Myra's cheeks, glowing faintly crimson like her blood, leaving tracks that shimmered in the moonlight. "You're crying," Nathaniel whispered, using the last of his strength to raise his hand to her face, to touch her cheek and feel the wet warmth of those impossible tears. "How are you crying?" "I don't know," Mira said, and her voice was filled with wonder and grief in equal measure. "I haven't been able to cry since the transformation. 3,000 years without tears, Nathaniel. But now I can't stop." Nathaniel understood then. The curse was breaking. Or perhaps it had already broken, shattered by the weight of genuine love and genuine loss, by the fulfillment of a prophecy neither of them had fully understood. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice barely audible. "More beautiful than I ever imagined. And so human. God, Mira, you're so human." "I'm remembering," she said, the tears falling faster now. "Memories I thought I'd lost forever. My village, my family. The taste of bread, the warmth of sunlight. The feeling of my mother's hands braiding my hair. I can remember my own face in the reflection of the river, remember looking at myself before the mask. I was young, Nathaniel. So young when I made the bargain. Barely 20 summers. I'd lived such a small life, and then I traded it for thousands of years of emptiness." "Not emptiness," Nathaniel managed. "You save people. Help people. You built the bookshop, preserved knowledge, protected those who needed protection. Your life meant something, Mira. It meant everything. But I lost myself," she said. "Lost who I was beneath the mask. The curse didn't just hide my face. It hid my memory of my face, my sense of identity, my connection to the girl I'd been. I became just the mask, just the role, just the cursed vampire with no past and no future. And now you've given it back to me. Given me back myself. Even as you're leaving." Nathaniel wanted to say something profound, something that would comfort her, but his body was shutting down. The pain had faded to a distant numbness, and he could feel himself drifting away on a dark tide. His vision narrowed to Myra's face, to those eyes that looked at him with love and grief and a terrible understanding. "Don't be alone," he said, the words coming slowly now, each one an effort. "Promise me. Don't hide behind the mask again. Don't retreat into darkness. Live, Mira. Find joy. Find love again even if it seems impossible. You deserve happiness. You've earned it 1,000 times over." "I can't love again," Mira said. "Not after you. You were my last chance at happiness, Nathaniel. My last hope after 3,000 years. And I'm losing you." "Then remember me," Nathaniel whispered. "Keep me in your heart. Let me be part of your story even after I'm gone. And know that I died grateful. Grateful for every moment we had together. Grateful that I got to know you, to love you, to see your true face before the end. Some people live long lives and never experience a fraction of what we had. I'm one of the lucky ones." "I love you," Mira said, leaning down to press her forehead to his. "I love you, Nathaniel Cross. And I'll remember. I'll remember everything. The bookshop and the travels and the quiet nights reading together. I'll remember how you looked at me without fear, how you saw past the monster to the woman beneath. I'll remember that someone loved me, truly loved me, even knowing what I was. That will have to be enough to sustain me through whatever comes next." "It will be," Nathaniel said. "It has to be." His eyes closed. He tried to open them again, wanted one last glimpse of Myra's face, but his body no longer obeyed him. The darkness was complete now, warm and welcoming, and he felt himself sinking into it like sinking into deep water. The last thing he heard was Myra's voice, broken and beautiful, singing a lullaby in a language that hadn't been spoken in 3,000 years. A song her mother had sung to her when she was a child, before the plague, before the curse, before the endless centuries of loss. She sang him out of the world with words of comfort and love, and Nathaniel Cross died in the arms of the woman he loved, beneath a broken castle ceiling that showed him the stars. For a long time after Nathaniel's heart stopped, Mira simply held him. She had held dying things before, had watched countless lives end in her arms over the millennia, had said goodbye to friends and lovers and people she'd tried to save. But this was different. This was a wound that went deeper than grief, deeper than loss. This was a tearing away of something fundamental, as if part of her soul had been ripped out and taken with Nathaniel into whatever lay beyond. The mask lay on the stones beside them, discarded and empty, its silver surface no longer glowing with runic power. The curse was broken. She could feel it in the way her memories had returned, in the tears that still fell from her eyes, in the subtle changes in her body that suggested a return toward something more human than she'd been in 3,000 years. But the cost. God, the cost. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky with colors Mira hadn't seen clearly in centuries. The mask had filtered her vision, she realized, had muted colors and dimmed the world in ways she'd stopped noticing. Now everything was painfully vivid. The gold and crimson of the autumn forest, the gray of the castle stones, the stark red of Nathaniel's blood on her hands. She should move. Should do something with his body, should give him some kind of burial or ceremony. But she found she couldn't let go, couldn't release him into the finality of death. As long as she held him, as long as his body remained warm from her touch, she could pretend that he might still wake, might still open his eyes and smile at her and make some dry observation about vampire healing and human fragility. But he didn't wake. He would never wake again. "You were wrong," she said to his still form, her voice hoarse from crying. "You said your death would mean something, would be worth something because it broke the curse. But what good is my freedom if you're not here to share it? What good is remembering my face if the only person who wanted to see it is gone?" The forest provided no answers. Birds sang in the trees, indifferent to her grief. The wind moved through the ruins, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and approaching winter. The world continued turning as it always had, uncaring that Nathaniel Cross had stopped moving with it. Mira felt a rage building in her, a fury that dwarfed anything she'd felt in 3,000 years. She wanted to scream at the heavens, to demand answers from the first vampire who had cursed her, to tear apart the very fabric of reality in protest of this injustice. Nathaniel had been good, genuinely, truly good in a way that was rare even among humans. He hadn't deserved to die protecting her. Hadn't deserved to have his life cut short just as he'd found purpose again after his sister's death. "I'll make it mean something," she said finally, looking down at Nathaniel's peaceful face. "Your death, your sacrifice. I won't let it be for nothing. You asked me to live, really live. To not hide anymore. So I'll do it. I'll find a way to honor what you gave me. I promise you that, Nathaniel. I promise." She stayed with him until sunset, unable to bear the thought of leaving him alone in the ruins. Then, with a gentleness that belied her supernatural strength, she lifted his body and carried him from the castle. She walked through the night, through the forest that had witnessed their last moments together, until she found a place that seemed right, a clearing where old trees grew and wildflowers bloomed even in autumn, where the moonlight fell soft and silver. She dug his grave with her bare hands, tearing through earth and root until she'd created a space deep enough to protect him from scavengers. She laid him to rest with care, arranging his body as if he were only sleeping, and covered him with earth and stones and late-blooming flowers. There were no words. No ceremony. What could she say that would encompass what he'd meant, what he'd given her, what she'd lost? Instead, she stood over the grave in silence, her maskless face turned toward the stars, and let herself feel the full weight of her grief without the curse's numbing distance. When she finally turned away from the grave, Mira was different than she'd been. The curse was broken, yes, but that was only part of it. Nathaniel's death had cracked something open inside her, had shattered the careful walls she'd built over centuries to protect herself from pain. For the first time in 3,000 years she felt fully, completely, devastatingly alive. And it hurt. God, how it hurt. But pain, she was discovering, was proof of love. Proof that what they'd had was real, that it mattered, that it couldn't be dismissed or forgotten or locked away behind a silver mask. The pain was something to be carried, to be honored, to be transformed into something meaningful. Nathaniel had asked her to live. So she would live. 5 years after Nathaniel's death, a young woman entered a bookshop in Prague that appeared between one breath and the next. The shop had no name on its sign anymore, just a symbol that seemed to shift and change when she tried to focus on it. A mask, or perhaps a face, or perhaps both at once. Inside, books rose in towers to a ceiling lost in shadow, and the air smelled of leather and dust and old magic. The young woman, barely 20, with curious eyes and an artist's hands, wandered between the shelves, drawn by something she couldn't name. "You're here," a voice said from the darkness, and a woman emerged from between the stacks. She was beautiful in a way that seemed to transcend normal beauty, with dark eyes that held within them the weight of ages and a face that was both delicate and strong. She wore no mask, and when she smiled there was sadness in it, but also warmth and a strange kind of hope. I was just exploring," the young woman stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude." "No one intrudes here," the woman, Mira, said gently. "This shop only appears to those who are searching for something they don't yet know they need. Tell me, what brings you to my door?" The young woman hesitated, then found herself answering honestly, "I'm an artist, but I've lost my inspiration. Everything I paint feels empty, meaningless. I'm looking for, I don't know, a reason to keep creating, I guess." Myra's smile deepened, touched with something that might have been recognition. "I know that feeling. I've spent a very long time searching for reasons to keep going. But I learned something important from someone important. Would you like to hear it?" "Yes," the young woman said. "The pain of loss is proof that love was real," Mira said softly. "And the struggle to create, the difficulty of finding meaning, that's proof that meaning exists to be found. The emptiness you feel isn't a sign that you should stop. It's a sign that you're capable of being filled with something greater than yourself. You just have to keep searching. Keep trying. Keep creating even when it hurts." "Did someone tell you that?" the young woman asked. "Someone showed me," Mira replied. "Through his life and his death and the gift he gave me. He taught me that even temporary things, especially temporary things, have profound value. That brief connections matter more than eternal emptiness. That love and loss and grief and joy are all part of the same beautiful, terrible experience of being alive." She moved to a shelf and pulled down a book, its cover black and unmarked. "Here, read this. It's a story about sacrifice and curse breaking and the ways that love transforms us. It's a true story, though most people won't believe it. But I think you'll understand." The young woman took the book, felt that strange shock of recognition she couldn't explain. "What is it called?" "The Last Mask," Mira said. "It's about a woman who lived too long and a man who didn't live long enough, and the moment when their paths crossed and changed everything. It's about seeing and being seen, about the faces we show the world and the truth we hide beneath them. It's about the price of immortality and the value of a single human life." "It sounds sad," the young woman said. "It is," Mira agreed. "But it's also beautiful. And hopeful. Because even though the story has loss in it, it also has love. And in the end, love is what endures. Love is what breaks curses and builds bridges and makes all the pain worthwhile." The young woman opened the book, saw handwriting that seemed to shift and change, languages flowing one into another in ways that shouldn't be possible but somehow were. And yet, impossibly, she could read it all. "Take your time," Mira said, gesturing to a comfortable chair in an alcove lit by a blue-white candle. "Stay as long as you need. And when you're finished, come find me. I'll be here. I'm always here now. That's what I do. I collect stories and share them with people who need them. It's my way of honoring what I was given. My way of making sure that temporary things aren't forgotten." As the young woman settled into the chair and began to read, Mira returned to her desk at the back of the shop. There, in a place of honor, sat a photograph she'd commissioned an artist to create from her memories, a portrait of Nathaniel Cross, captured in the moment just before he'd smiled, that half-second of joy that had lit up his face like sunrise. Next to the photograph sat the silver mask, no longer magical, no longer binding, just a reminder of who she'd been and what she'd escaped. And next to the mask sat Nathaniel's notebooks, filled with his sketches and observations and theories about the supernatural world, preserved perfectly, read and reread countless times over the past 5 years. Mira touched the photograph gently, a gesture that had become ritual. "Someone new today," she said softly, speaking to memory, to ghost, to the love that endured past death. "Another person searching for meaning. Another story beginning. You'd like her, I think. She has your curiosity, your hunger for understanding. She'll read our story and maybe find something in it that helps her. Maybe remember us, even if just for a little while." The bookshop settled into silence, broken only by the rustle of pages as the young woman read. Outside, Prague moved through its ordinary evening, unaware of the magic tucked into its hidden corners, the impossible shop that appeared to those who needed it most. And in that shop, a woman who had lived 3,000 years found purpose in preservation, in sharing, in making sure that the man who'd loved her despite everything wouldn't be forgotten. She had removed her mask just as he'd asked. She was living, really living, in ways she hadn't thought possible. It still hurt. She still grieved. There were nights when the weight of Nathaniel's absence felt like it would crush her, when she wanted nothing more than to put the mask back on and retreat into the comfortable numbness of the curse. But she didn't. She carried the pain because the pain was proof. Proof that love had been real. Proof that she was human even in her immortality. Proof that Nathaniel Cross had existed and mattered and changed her in ways that could never be undone. The young woman at the alcove turned a page, her eyes wide as she read about plague and bargains and ancient forests where darkness dwelled. She was just beginning the story. Just discovering the woman who would sacrifice everything to save her people, the curse that would last 3,000 years, the man who would break it at the cost of his own life. Mira smiled, touched with sorrow, touched with hope. Another reader. Another person who would carry the story forward, who would remember, who would understand that even temporary loves could have eternal meaning. "Thank you," she whispered to the photograph, to the memory, to the ghost that lived in her heart. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for teaching me that endings aren't failures, they're just transformations. You're gone, but you're not forgotten. And as long as I exist, as long as I keep sharing our story, you never will be." The candle flame flickered in a wind that came from nowhere, casting dancing shadows across the towers of books. Somewhere in the depths of the shop, a clock chimed the hour. Time passing as it always did, carrying everyone forward toward unknown futures. But here, in this pocket of shadow and magic, the past lived on. Preserved. Honored. Shared with those who needed to know that sacrifice mattered, that love endured, that even curses could be broken by the simple, impossible courage of human connection. The last mask had fallen. The truth had been revealed. And in the revelation, Mira had found not an ending but a beginning. A new story, a new purpose, a new way of existing that honored both who she'd been and who she'd become. She was the keeper of stories now. The guardian of memories. The witness who would ensure that Nathaniel Cross's brief, brilliant life would echo through eternity, touching hearts and changing lives long after he'd returned to dust. It was enough. Not what she'd wanted, but what she'd been given. And in the end, that was what love was. Not getting what you wanted, but cherishing what you'd had, and finding ways to make it matter beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. The young woman at the alcove continued reading, her face illuminated by candlelight, her eyes filling with tears as she reached the part where masks were lifted and truths revealed and loves were lost and found and lost again. And in the shadows, a vampire who'd learned to cry smiled through her own tears, grateful for the pain, grateful for the love, grateful for the temporary human who taught her that immortality meant nothing without connection, that faces were less important than souls, that the willingness to be vulnerable was the greatest courage of all. "I'm living," she said softly. "Just like you asked. I'm living, Nathaniel. For both of us. Forever." And in the impossible bookshop that existed between shadows, in the heart of a vampire who'd remembered how to be human, Nathaniel Cross lived on.